My name is Piotr Mądry. I am a tech lead and Android developer at AppUnite. I'm working with software for almost 8 years and with Android for 5 years. And today I want to tell you about my journey, which I went through a few months ago when I was moving my previous project to the navigation component. I want to tell about what's the reasons behind the navigation change. What is great in this library, and what is even more important, what obstacles I found on my way. So, when I was, let's start with the explanation. What is the navigation component? So, the navigation component is the library provided by Google, which is also the part of the Android Jetpack. Basically, it allows you to navigate across the app. It handles for you the fragment transactions and transitions. And this is the small suggestion that probably we should use the single activity architecture. It introduced the concept of navigation graph, which holds all your fragments and all your navigation actions in a single place. With the small help of the Safe Arcs plugin, we are able to pass the data between the destinations in a safe way. It implements and handles deep links, and for the UI, there's a good synergy with the widgets like the button navigation or the navigation drawer. Okay, now we know what is the navigation component. Let's talk about the reasons behind the navigation change. Why we decided to do such a risky step? Because the arguments against this idea were like, our app is in the production stage. It's used by hundreds of people every day, and it generates some revenue. When I was joining the team, I knew that the previous team that started the project, they introduced their own framework for the navigation. And there is nothing wrong about this, as long as this framework will fit into our needs. By our needs, I mean the product team needs, because they are responsible for their business. And with the help of our software, they want to generate even more revenue. And for us, for developers, because we don't like to work with the software that behaves in a different way than we expect, or if it doesn't work. Okay, we knew that we have a bunch of crashes and bugs in the app connected to the navigation. And we couldn't do much about this, or we could. We couldn't, but I think we could, but probably we'll spend more time on it than we wanted to. And we weren't sure that the similar bugs, like in the legacy navigation framework, will not appear in the future. Another story is about the code abstraction. I believe that the abstraction might be a very powerful tool to achieve our goals. But at the same time, it might be the trap. Because if we'll try to do something in a little bit different way than our abstraction code expects, we are starting to adding the new methods into it. We do some workarounds to make it work. And at the end of the day, our abstraction code is growing. And if we are thinking about the clean and scalable code, such the situations shouldn't even happen. Basically, if we wanted to add the new fragment into our legacy navigation framework, we had to implement the bunch of methods which weren't responsible only for the navigation. Some of them were responsible for the things like screen orientation or theme colors. And this is problematic because if you want to change the app behavior globally, it might not work because this framework overrides our changes in the runtime. When we try to do a little bit more complicated operations than just moving from one screen to another, almost every time we've got some issues with it. And we felt bad about this situation because we couldn't provide the best solutions for the product. From the most basic one, like passing the data between the destinations, and to more complex, like the shared element transitions. But the most important point here is that at this time, we knew that we are ready for the change. We've done some preparation for that. And we built our confidence on the two things. And the first thing is that when we started to work on this project, we built over 300 integration tests around the functionalities. So almost every screen transition in the app was tested. And this is great because even if you have the QA member in your team, sometimes it's pretty hard to test all the navigation cases for very complex apps manually. So every automation here is warmly welcome. Another part of building our confidence was the MVP project, which implements the navigation component. We wanted to be sure that every navigation case from our production app can be achieved with the navigation component. We spent some time on it. We did a few pair programming sessions around this project. Unfortunately, we didn't find all the answers for the questions, and we didn't find the solutions for all our problems. From the most basic one, like that we need to hide the bottom navigation on our own. For example, if we have the fragment, which is the part of the bottom navigation, and we want to open another fragment, we need to find the way to hide the bottom navigation on our own. And there is no such mechanism in the navigation component. And this is totally okay, because not every app behaves like our app. And the solution is pretty easy, because we can listen for the destination changes. And if the new destination is one of our 3 tabs, that means we can show the bottom navigation. Otherwise, we can simply hide it. Hopefully, you remember my words when I was talking about the navigation graph. This is also the visual representation of your app. So you're able to see the whole flow of your app from the beginning to the end. But probably on this graph, you don't know where is the beginning of your app and where is the end. For me, it's a totally mess, and those connections says nothing to me. And this is something different than I expected from this graph, because when I was watching the examples from the Google team, it looked a little bit different. One disclaimer here is that I used only one navigation graph to handle all the fragments and all the actions. One small issue that I have with this graph, personally, is that it rendered for me very slowly. And the reason is that I added the layout for every fragment in a navigation graph. So the graph needs to render all the layouts from my whole app. And this is why it renders so slow. So probably you should just skip this line of code for the performance improvement. The first quite big challenge for me was to deal with the fragments, which are the part of the page adapter in tab layout. I was asking myself if I need to add them to the navigation graph. And the answer is no, you don't need to. And probably you shouldn't. And the one thing that is worth to mention is that if you want to open some actions from the fragments that are the part of the page adapter and tab layout, they should be right down under the fragment which holds the tab layout and the page adapter. And this is because the fragment which holds the tab layout and the page adapter is the last fragment in a stack. And that means this is the correct context to open new destinations. For me, the biggest challenge was to find the way how to pass the data from the current fragment to the previous one. How to pass, I would say, the fragment result from the current fragment to the previous one, or any fragment that want to listen for this data. I didn't find the answer in the navigation component, but I found the answer in a Google issue tracker, and I will show you the solution provided by Google team, just a little bit improved. If we want to introduce this solution, we need to put two new concepts into this idea. The first concept is the live data. The live data is observable and at the same time the data holder. And in this case, it also has the additional functionality. And so you're able to read the data only once from this live data. And this ability might be reset after setting the new value into it. And this is the expected behavior because the fragments that I listen for this result probably will react with the UI on it. And if we'll think about the configuration changes and just the fragment switches, we don't want to react every time with the UI on this result. Another part of this equation is the view model. And the view model with the activity context allows our live data to survive the fragment lifecycle. That means that we create the data layer above the fragments, but at the same time, this data is available for every fragment in that activity. Now, if we'll add a few fancy extension functions to simplify the process of setting the data into our view model and observing on this data, it leads to the complete solution for handling the fragment result. All we need to do is we need to create a class which extends our view model with the specific type. Now, if we want to close the fragment, we need to get access to this view model, set the data, then close the fragment. And if we want to observe on this data, we should put this function into onStart method in a fragment. So if the particular fragment wants to listen for this result, we will observe on the specific data in a specific view model and probably react on it with the UI. Now I have the small question for you guys. Let's assume that we have the fragment with the two actions, write it down under it. And the question is, what would happen when we will click on those two buttons at the same time? What do you think? OK, so I can give you another clue. The app will behave in a different way for Android 9 and above, and in a different way for Android below the 9. Any ideas? OK, so unfortunately, the app will crash. And the funny thing is, this is not the problem of the navigation graph and the navigation component. This is the problem of fragments in Android X. When we click on those two buttons at the same time, which is not, of course, possible, one of these buttons will trigger the fragment transaction faster. Unfortunately, the second fragment transaction will be triggered too. And the problem is that the fragment should cancel it or do not allow for the second fragment transaction. But it does. And we have two solutions for that. The first is that we can grab those two actions from this specific fragment and put it into just into the navigation graph and make them global actions. But we'll lose the ability to see which directions we can open from the specific fragment. The second solution, which is of course not ideal, is that we can simply wrap the navigate function into try catch and catch exception which provide to the crash. The problem with this solution is that if we'll use the navigate component in the wrong way, we will not know if this is our fault or this is the situation where which I described a moment ago. But let's leave the bad things behind us. Let's move to the cool things about this library. So this library is provided by the Google team, which means there's a bunch of experts behind this product. And I'm 100% sure that it will be tested, or it is tested. It's easy to use, because for 90% of the time, you don't need to care about the navigation cases in your app, because you can simply use those two functions. The first one is for opening the fragments, and the second one is just to closing them. As I remember correctly, on this Thursday, I went through the process of implementing the navigation component in my newest project. And it took me about 5 minutes. So I think it's pretty impressive because if we are thinking of implementing the new navigation approach, probably in other cases, it will take more time. You don't need to care about the fragment backstack. It's handled by default in the navigation component. For example, in common way on Android, let's assume that we have the single activity and the fragment, and we have to handle the case when user will click on a back button, and we need to prevent from closing this fragment because we will leave the empty activity. Personally, I really like the navigation component because it holds all our all the destinations and all the actions in a single place. So I don't need to search through the code for such information. SafeArcs plugin saves us a lot of time because we don't need to write the functions for bundling and unbundling our arguments on our own. And if you will now ask me if navigation component will fit into every running project, I would say, I don't know, it depends. But I'm sure that it will be great navigation framework for your new projects. And I want to apologize to you because I spent the 50% of my presentation on focusing on the things like the problems and the bad things. But I believe that it will be more valuable for you instead of talking about the good things, which will not help you make the decisions in the real world. And this is everything from me.